Hello and welcome to this virtual presentation of the paper High Water Pants, Designing Embodied Environmental Speculation. My name is Heidi Biggs and I will be presenting the paper in this video. Our interest in the intersection of cycling and climate change started within my own commitment to everyday cycling. I've been riding bikes in Seattle, USA for the past 13 years for a plethora of reasons, including racing, commuting, touring, delivering pizza, and socializing. However, both authors are daily cyclists, so we were both passionate about the topic. In Seattle, the last few summers posed risky conditions for bike commuting due to air pollution from forest fire smoke, which could be attributed in part to climate change. This made us realize that climate change could impact cycling practices. It also made us realize that due to everyday exposure to the elements, cyclists will be uniquely impacted by climate change. It could pose threats to mental and physical health, mobility, and sense of freedom. However, there's a problem of perception which bars understanding of climate change. Due to the natural fluctuations in weather and the generational and global scale of climate change, it's hard for everyday cyclists to tangibly grasp or reliably pinpoint the manifestations of climate change at the scale of everyday life. In short, climate change is hard to feel. Therefore, we present the High Water Pants, a mechatronic pair of pants designed for cyclists which seek to situate climate change in its intersections with everyday cyclists and make it perceptible within their everyday practices. Ultimately, the High Water Pants seek to help stimulate urgency around climate change by encouraging everyday cyclists to notice, validate, envision, and concretize their intersections with climate change. This paper offers two contributions. First, an accounting of our research through design process used to make the pants, and second, a reflection on the artifact and its implications for design. In our related works, we situate the project amidst a history of cycling championed as a sustainable urban mode of transportation. We were also inspired by recent turns toward post-anthropocentric framings and focus on climate change and sustainable human-computer interaction design. We outline how our project is an example of speculative design, specifically as an example of material and embodied speculation. And we finally discuss how this design is part of a lineage of tangible, wearable technology for cyclists. To build up to the creation of the High Water Pants, we underwent a research through design process to understand how everyday cycling might intersect with climate change. We wanted to leverage cyclists' existing intersections with climate and weather to imagine a speculative artifact that would meaningfully fit into their existing life worlds. An initial generative round of research consisted of first-person rapid experience prototypes. These experience prototypes probed connections between cyclists' relationships to their gear, their environment, and the elements. These experiments made us committed to making a functioning artifact, because we noticed the experience of using something designed to ask a question brought those questions to life and answered them in unexpected and lively ways. And we also noticed that cycling gear, which is an established mediator between cyclists and climate, held the potential to serve as an entry point into more active reflection on cyclists' intersections with climate change. So after refining our research question through first-person explorations, we sought to expand and connect our experience to how everyday cyclists understood climate, weather, and climate change. So we conducted 6 semi-structured interviews with everyday cyclists, which we defined as people who rode their bike an average of 4 to 7 days a week, year-round, for at least 2 years. And we asked about their histories of cycling and details about their practices as it related to climate and weather, and followed by asking them open-ended questions about their understanding of climate change and whether they noticed trends in their cycling practices that related to climate change. Because we wanted this design artifact to be speculative and future-looking, we created a cultural probe kit to help us move from the as-is understanding of everyday cyclists, which we gained through interviews, into a more speculative, future-oriented space. These probes were deployed with 5 everyday cyclists for about a week and then collected, analyzed, and thematically coded. There were 3 activities and a set of climate change facts to ground people in possible futures with climate change. The 3 activities were a map, a booklet, and an imaginary sensor set. The map exercise helped tie seasonal understandings more closely to Seattle. The gear-oriented booklet gave gear a voice about its feelings about weather and climate change, and strange sensors allowed cyclists to imagine what they would want to track or sense about climate change if existing technologies were no barrier. I will now share some of the findings from our semi-structured interviews and probe that shaped the design of the high water pants. For the sake of time, I'll share 4 in detail, but please check the paper for longer descriptions and 2 more themes. So for starters, cyclists have a rich sensorial and embodied understanding of Seattle's climate. They experience the seasons through trail conditions, smell, feeling, and touch, reporting things like black ice under leaves in early winter, smelling lilacs in the spring, and describing fall air as moldy fresh. We also saw there were times when cyclists reported a kind of transcendent blending into their surroundings, describing being caught in a very heavy rain. Participant Darla, and all names are pseudonyms, recounts feeling so drenched that she felt, quote, one with it all. In another anecdote, Micah explained a surreal experience when a flying V of ducks included him in their V during his morning commute. He comically recalled thinking, "Am I a duck?" We also discovered that climate change is deeply distressing, but difficult to perceive at the scale of everyday life. When asked how they feel about climate change, participants responded, "I believe in it because science." Or, "It makes me extremely sad." However, when asked if they have noticed weather trends that they would attribute to climate change, people responded with uncertainty, saying they needed more time to know, or it was hard to put a finger on it. But interestingly, when prompted to consider future impacts of climate change, while the participants' feelings about global and abstract scales were often catastrophic and depressing, their local and personal reflections weren't necessarily negative. They were ambivalent about whether hotter summers would be good or bad. Some cyclists reported disliking heat. Others seemed to think they would ride more. And some thought more variable weather made for more beautiful and interesting riding conditions, like double rainbows in the case of Darla. And all of this is to say that local personal narratives about experiences of climate change are more ambiguous and complex than global or large-scale narratives passed down through media. So now jumping over to the making process, I'm going to dive into the concept of the high water pants, which we arrived at after ideation and built through a series of tests and iterations. Based off our research, we identified a few design principles. First, we wanted to resist design directions that sought to change the behavior of cyclists. And second, we sought to leverage the embodied histories and practices of Seattle's everyday cyclists. And finally, we wanted to design for noticing and open-ended reflection. The high water pants are named after the colloquial term for pants that end above the ankle, jokingly associated with a coming flood, a play on how the concept is tied to data about sea level rise in the Puget Sound. The high water pants dynamically shorten in correspondence with areas in Seattle that will be acutely impacted by sea level rise in the future, signaling to the rider that they are in a location that will be affected by sea level rise in 30 to 80 years. The pants use sea level rise maps from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration as a reference for handcrafted geofences. The pants actuate within these geofenced areas as live GPS coordinates are passed through a polygon detection algorithm run by a microcontroller. All the hardware is carried on the cyclist as they ride. After crafting the high water pants, the final phase of our research through design process was deploying the pants with everyday cyclists to observe how embodied interactions with sea level rise data could spur unique and situated speculation about futures of cycling with climate change. This deployment is described in more detail in the paper, but essentially, we deployed the pants with 3 everyday cyclists, explaining how the pants function by raising up in areas that would be impacted by sea level rise, and then letting them ride their bike in a specified area. We conducted an exit interview to understand their reactions and thoughts afterward. One finding from this deployment was that participants gave anecdotal tellings of imagined futures that opened up new realizations. Patricia notes how public spaces like waterfront parks might disappear, stating, "It's such a nice open space and there's so many people utilizing it, but then it goes straight from park to just straight up buildings. I think it'd be a totally different experience living here without that access to the waterfront, because otherwise it's like buildings and then water." all the participants remarked on the feeling of the device, noticing how it didn't feel like a typical haptic sensation generated by technologies. Mort remarked, "It wasn't, a device beeping at me and saying, this is the area. I was just feeling it, sensing it." They also all mentioned various strategies for exploring the boundaries of the geofence, and Patricia mentioned that the pants oscillated between up and down at geofence boundaries, creating a kind of anticipatory sensation in these liminal zones. Ultimately, this was a very small deployment, and in the future we hope to do a larger study with more cyclists, where participants can keep the pants and test them over multiple areas over multiple days. So, just as a reminder, these pants weren't trying to persuade cyclists to change their behaviors to be more sustainable or directly impact climate change by reducing CO2 emissions. Our approach worked by bringing attention to and opening a space for noticing potential future impacts of climate change at its intersections with everyday cycling practices. We learned a great deal through designing and deploying the high water pants, and we quickly discussed 3 main takeaways from the process. First, we argue that we created a time-bending wearable technology that enables actual, tangible comparison between now and the future, bridging a generational timescale. The tactility of the data allows for comparison and offers a creative moment instead of asking participants to conduct a creative action. Participants can be with a possible future in real time, which leaves speculation open-ended, rooted in a personal experience, and free to be authored and evolve over time. Secondly, we discuss how we mediated human-non-human intersections and included non-human voices in our research methods. On the one hand, we were influenced by post-anthropocentric thinkers and tried to include the concepts of more than human assemblages and more than human voices in our research methods, like including the voice of cycling gear in our probe and asking specific questions about seasonal plants and animals in our mapping exercises. In addition, we claim the pants are in dialogue with the writer and that they actuate independent of a writer's wants or needs. They have dual voices as well, one which is speaking literally about geographic locations, but another which serves as a kind of oracle or translator, speaking for and from an ecology to be, which will be impacted by sea level rise in the future. Thirdly, we are interested in continuing to push framings of sustainability in HCI. Inspired by our research findings where everyday cyclists were ambivalent about climate change outcomes, we realized that in order to imagine adaptive and co-creative paths forward in the face of climate change, it seems beneficial to design technologies that allow people to conduct open-ended explorations which allow for curiosity, hope, beauty, destruction, playfulness, and concern to all coexist. Thank you for watching this presentation of our paper, and we hope you enjoyed it, and please reach out with any questions or discussion.